Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Exploring the Spectrum. Today, I'm very excited to have Elizabeth Horn with us. She is the Executive Director of 2M Foundation, co founder of Autism Impact Fund, co founder of the Brain Foundation, and mom to Sophia, a 30-year-old young woman with motor issues and an ASD diagnosis. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
I am very excited to have you here because even how I originally reached out to you was so perfect because it's a testament to what I really hope this podcast does for people, which is help people evolve their understanding, help them change their mind with new information. Because for me, for a long time, I was very much on this kind of, autism is XYZ and we need to nurture this. And I still do believe that there's value there. But hearing one of your podcasts, you completely shifted it for me because from a mother's perspective, it's like, yes, there are certain things that I want to improve in my child, which is not exactly the same thing that I was hearing before. So, can you please share with us your background and how you got into the work that you're doing?
Certainly, I always like to frame my journey with the fact that the geography that I occupy with my daughter is important. We're in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley, as everyone knows, is the place where loads of paradigm shifts have occurred over the couple of generations that I've been here. So I always felt that having more information about my daughter's condition could only help me to first try to figure out how to help her to get past the life limiting systems of a diagnosis that was pretty bleak. When she was diagnosed in 1997, when I went to look for information, one of the first books I looked at said this is a lifelong condition and there's no cure. And the most you can hope for is to make them comfortable, give them some behavioral therapy, which back then wasn't even approved by insurance, and try to get a little speech therapy in. So, one of the first things I did once I sort of picked myself up off the floor was to go look for families whose kids had gotten better. And I made a film, and Nicole Shanahan put that film out last Christmas, a year ago Christmas. It's called Finding the Words. And in that film, my purpose was to go try to find families whose kids had actually defied that bleak diagnosis and who had recovered. What I quickly learned was recovery, even then, was sort of a word that you didn't go near because then it was considered a genetic disorder. Then it was considered uninsurable. And the best you could hope for was maybe to find a good group home or institution to put that child in. So the stories of the 7 families that were covered in the film were utterly inspiring to me as a new mom. But it also made me begin rethinking this idea that autism was this fixed mark that could never be changed, that there was really no hope once you got that diagnosis. Back then, the diagnoses were not nearly as epidemic level as they are now, but there was clearly a move upward, an upward trend in kids being diagnosed with the disorder. So that began my journey in trying to essentially redefine autism as not a disorder that was fixed, where there was no possibility of improvement or even recovery. And by recovery, I mean no longer distinguishable from normal peers, which is I think, the clinical definition of that, but also to inform what was actually happening with the health of our children. Because although many of my friends didn't have kids with autism then, now that's changed dramatically. They had kids with allergies and ADHD and kids who were at risk from other chronic conditions. So I knew that being here in Silicon Valley and working with other people who were all about trying to figure out how to drive businesses with data. This is when you had to explain that things were in the cloud. Shortly after this, that if we had the kinds of data that were possible to start collecting now, that maybe I could find answers for my daughter that would help her to get better and whatever that means to her and to me, but also to start to better understand the health of our kids in general.
And when you were exploring all of this with your daughter, what were the obstacles that you were encountering, whether in her, healthcare, school systems? What were you experiencing as a mother?
Well, most of the pediatricians that I was seeing, I had to walk away from early because they really didn't know that much about autism. Um, because my daughter was diagnosed early, which is what everyone said, you need to diagnose early because that's how you can make the big changes. They're actually still saying that. So my daughter was diagnosed at 2, and I immediately pulled together a huge group of the best ABA people, the best speech therapists, the best behaviorists, all to work with my daughter. And back then, insurance didn't really cover any of this stuff. So I quickly realized that I was either going to spend time fighting with the insurance companies to pay a small portion of what I was laying out for my daughter's care and support, or I was just going to pay for it myself. So we started working harder and paying to get the best possible people in. And then we tracked everything we did from the very beginning. And to most parents who've been in it for a long time, they're going to know that the closet filled with 3-ring binders is really common, of all your data around ABA and speech therapy and everything you did to try to help that child to speak if your child was a non-speaker, and then stop the behaviors, the negative behaviors that cause them to get released from school programs, that kept them from going out in public without fearing that there would be some sort of either legal retribution because you're on the street corner with a screaming child, or out of classrooms because your child was completely disruptive. So I think I learned early on, and the reason I made the film, honestly, one of the reasons was so I could start to gather a core group of radical thinkers in the clinical space, in the educational space, in the therapeutic space, to try to, even then, even though I probably wouldn't have called it that back then, to try to create new models for our kids that would be about trying to eliminate or minimize the negative behaviors that were keeping them from being able to learn and speak and move in a way that was more typical and develop in a more typical way. So early on with the film, I met all of the and these were pioneers in the clinical space. All of the doctors, Anju Usman and Jeff Bradstreet. I met Andy Wakefield early on and talked with the parents who had kids who were gut kids. So I went there with a filmmaking eye, with a journalist's eye, talked to anyone who thought they were getting kids better, including some of the doctors that were included in my film. So, likewise in the education space, my daughter, like many others, was kicked out of 5 schools. So, along the way, because she had horrible meltdowns. The meltdowns were actually brought on by behavioral therapy, unfortunately. So, we did so much behavioral therapy because they said 40 hours and 40 hours and you're going to nail it, right? So, I hired wonderful people, people who'd actually trained with Ivar Lovas. I mean, they were great. But what was actually going on with her had nothing to do with her behavior at the table. There were biological influences that I wasn't aware of then that were causing the behaviors. So after a while, she revolted mightily from sitting at a table doing discrete trial therapy. And she would go under the table and start kicking and screaming. And after about 15, 20 minutes, the ABA therapist, because they only had a limited time to be here, would go. So then she wouldn't be pushed into this I think really boring for her set of discrete trial behaviors in order to fulfill the early ABA requirements. So I ended up founding a school, and the school is called the QC Lab, Quantified Classroom, QC Lab, because we try to measure everything. And again, I think if you listen to me talking about this in interviews from 20 years ago, I'm pretty much saying the same thing that I say today. That is, if we have data on our kids and can understand the underlying biology that may be causing the meltdowns, the situations, and we talked, I think in the community, we talked early about sensory integration and limiting some of the overstimulating elements of schoolrooms. All of those things were valid observations. Now we can actually measure what they do to you pathophysiologically, right? And how they could be driving some of the behaviors that are limiting. I think the big change for me with my daughter happened when we did start our school. And when I decided to presume, they call it presumed competence now, but when I decided instead of teaching her the same things over and over and over again at first grade level, when she was now entering high school, we would teach her at age level and see what she could do. The other thing that we introduced about the same time was rapid prompting method with Soma Makapati. This is the letter board, which is still controversial, which gave this my daughter who had issues with her body not cooperating with what was going on in her head. The first time she sat down with a letter board with a woman from the rapid prompting Halo group, she started immediately spelling for I think she had a 45-minute session the first time she started. My staff sat around watching Lene Crandall with my daughter crying because no one could believe that all this stuff was in that head. Now I knew it as a mother, right? But seeing her do this, I thought, "Oh my god, this is unbelievable." Well, all these years later, it's still not considered a valid method, spelling to communicate, RPM, typing, whatever you wanna call it, because there's still not I think my daughter's subtype was probably a motor autism subtype. Her issues are motor. So what we're about is trying to figure out how we can work around the motor issues, enable her to continue to learn and grow while we still continue to try to better understand why so many kids in the autism community can't speak. I mean, I'm not okay with not having answers to the major issues. Never really have been. So, started a school, trained many staffers to work with our kids, started an autism impact fund to fund an ecosystem of product and service companies that would support this new view of autism, that just running ABA programs for 18 years, 20 years was simply not enough to change the outcome for our kids. And it didn't answer the basic question for me. What is this? What is this condition that has so many serious comorbid conditions that ride along with it? My daughter has seizures. My daughter had horrible self-injury. My daughter never had GI issues, but definitely had sleep issues, anxiety issues. So what we call autism is actually this cluster of things that result from some imbalances biologically that manifest as these particular symptoms. So when the neurodiverse community came out and started supporting the idea that all of these people should be accepted as they are, and we're not sick, we don't really need to do anything, you don't need to do anything to cure or help us. I think most of us parents who spent massive amounts of time, energy, money, tears trying to get our kids who were really having issues better felt like it was an absolute slap in the face because we couldn't march. We couldn't My daughter can't blog or couldn't blog about this kind of thing then. And I don't think it was from any position of trying to be hurtful. I think it's all because we really need to redefine autism, and it needs to be redefined biologically. And if you don't have the issues that limit your life, but you're just quirky and brilliant, I say more power to you. Come and help us who don't have that advantage. Join our side of the autism spectrum. Eventually, I think we'll completely change the way we define autism. The sooner the better, actually.
And as you know, that was the original idea for the podcast name, redefining it. And, you said that we have this new view of autism, and you've been in the thick of it for decades now. What are you seeing as the shift, or what's allowing for this shift? And what's the new view of autism that is evolving?
Well, and this goes back to my absolute love of data. And I think that the turning point in the journey that I'm on now, we've been collecting data for a long time here. We have a dashboard for my daughter. I've sent the dashboard around to many credible and illustrious clinicians who say we would love to have that kind of data on our patients. The way we've been collecting it was certainly not cheap and not scalable. So I trained a lot of people, as I said, sometimes we had enormous binders on all the various data points just to better understand. In data, you talk about signal versus noise. Noise is stuff that you collect that doesn't really help you answer your questions. Signal are is the stuff that's really relevant. So we spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out what we could measure on kids like my daughter that would help us to manage her care and to make her life and her health get better. So just an example, we started putting sensors and wearables and anything that we could find that would help us start to capture data in a more what they call frictionless. So meaning you don't have to write stuff down. The device just dumps it into a data set. I mean, we started with the Nike Fuel Band way back when. You probably never heard of it, and 23andMe, and we put together a kit called the Compass Kit in 2014. That's how I started. Really, was the start of my nonprofit 2M was with Compass. And the idea, the mission of Compass back then was to bring people together who had ways that we could begin to build a multidimensional, open source data set for autism in the cloud so we could ask questions. So I still have the Compass kit here in my meeting room, and the people that I met then, Linda Avey, who's now Linnea Avey, was a co-founder of 23andMe. One of my partners in Brain Foundation, Pramila Srinivasan, who runs Charm Health, which I also co-founded with her in order to just capture data on our kids. Martha Herbert, who's a long-standing big thinker in autism from Harvard. I think she's retired now, who wrote a book called The Autism Revolution. Andy Kogelnick, who was a biomathematician, MD, PhD, who worked with people with complex, mysterious diseases, trying to find the biological underpinnings. And then Alan Rappaport was our other co-founder of Compass. And he actually started the first AI company in Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, he now has Parkinson's, really severe Parkinson's disease. But it was literally the five of us sitting in my living room thinking, okay, what do we need to measure? How can we measure it? How can we make it cheap enough to measure it? How can we get parents to measure it? And how will that information help us to guide the treatment path for our kids? And we were really thinking like 23andMe thinking and Nike Fuel Band thinking, this is not something you have to go to a doctor to get. This is something that goes to what they call direct to consumer. So we did that. We got some information back. We measured microbiome early on and all these other things. We were too early. we, were, we were so early, but that Compass meeting then grew into this foundation, 2M Foundation, which has essentially the same mission. That is to bring people and technology together to create change. And in the autism space, the big change that happened about a year ago was the announcement of agentic AI. So in this, I don't want to get too technical because honestly, I can't get too technical. But when I heard that one of the inventors of agentic AI, Andrew Ng, describing how this kind of AI was iterative and reflexive, what that said to me was that every time I ask a question and do a search, this agent will learn from that. And every time I put a document in or a lab, or if I want to take all of my daughter's history and put it into a data set, this agent, which we call Count.ai because we actually started building it, would remember where I put it, when I put it, could graph the changes over time, could go look at other information in existing data sets, foundation models out there in the world that were open source about seizures and periods and all the kinds of questions that I was constantly on my computer looking for answers for. But now I've got a friend who's walking alongside me who thinks 100 times faster than I do, never sleeps, and gets smarter every time I ask him something. So when I heard that, I thought, okay, this is it. This is what we've been waiting for. So, and I couldn't find anyone that was doing it in the autism space. So about a year or so ago, We just started building a proof of concept for an agent for people, for families with kids. And again, the idea is still the same as with the early Compass meetings. If we all collect data on our kids, and a lot of it comes from wearables and sensors and environmental information that's automatically dumped into this little app that's on your phone, then if we have thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who all have this wonderful continuous view, they call it longitudinal in science, and we de-identify it, so make it anonymous and share it in that big data set we dreamed of all those years ago, we will finally begin to understand what's causing our kid to have these problems. But more than that, how to prevent other kids from having these problems, because we finally see the things in the environment and the genomic vulnerabilities that are responsible for tipping our kids into this dynamically moving condition that changes over time if you don't fix the biological imbalances and limits what our child can do in our child's future. Now, the other part of this in terms of the tech is brain computer interface, psychedelics, this is there are so many amazing kinds of treatments that could shift things almost immediately for some of our kids. But again, we need to know which kids and what's the right timing and what are the ancillary systems that might be affected. And all of that, for many years, doctors would say to me when I talked to them about looking at everything but genes, they would laugh and say, "Well, that's impossible. You can't do that." Well, we can now. So that's what we're gonna do.
The There's a few things, you have agentic AI that came out, and you also have this recent focus on personalized medicine for the average person. And it's almost bringing these things together because there's that common saying that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And like you said, it's for your specific kid. Maybe gives you information on what other kids might be susceptible. But this personalized care combined with advances in AI, it's allowing you to do what you've been banging the drum for decades.
Yeah, you are absolutely right, and I take no credit. I mean, there are many voices out there, as you know, that have been talking about the need for personalized medicine. So, I found it reassuring because this came to me as a mom, and it's come to many other moms as well, but I was so reassured to hear people like Eric Topol, who wrote the book, again, long time ago, The Creative Destruction of Medicine, calling for more personalized medicine. One of my other heroes, Lee Hood, the systems biology guy, who's one of the partners in this new initiative that we just presented to the new administration in DC, Bobby Kennedy's HHS. Loads of people have been saying this is the only solution. And what I like to say to families is, here's the deal. What works best is what works for you. Until you know what's going on with your kid or you, if you're a person with autism and issues, GI issues or whatever, until you know you have that baseline, you have that profile that shows you the things about your health that may be driving the behaviors. And this is when you see that kind of thinking expands out to include all of chronic illness, mental health for sure, the things you eat, how you live, the things you put on your skin, where you vacation, does your house have mold? All of these things are obviously part of the system, the ecosystem surrounding every single person, which is unique. And then you come in with a unique, even though most of our genes are pretty much alike, you come in with unique vulnerabilities around things like detoxification. We're all kind of looking at the same pathways. In our meetings, we've had Parkinson's people, ALS people, ME/CFS people, you name it, because we're all looking at the same underlying biology. So again, my extraordinary hopefulness now is that two things. We have an administration now, whether you agree, there's political ideology involved, I understand. But for the first time, this administration has come to groups like mine and said, What would you change? What would you do differently? How can we help you? How can we help to better subtype the kids who have these kinds of chronic diseases? And additionally, how can we track the effectiveness of any intervention we do so that we know if you're spending time and Medicaid or Medicare or you or the insurers are spending money, it's improving the outcome for the person that it's meant to help. And if it's not, change. We've never had that ever in autism. Everyone got shuttled into ABA. We're now seeing that some of the vulnerabilities of that system are showing up in in major red flags around fraud. And a lot of it is because there are no biomarkers. We're not measuring biology. We're saying this kid behaves like a kid with autism. Therefore, we're going to spend this money on this kid for 18 years. You can see there's a giant wide open door. And whether it's, criminal behavior or just because they don't have better tools, we can't say that. That's not an excuse anymore. We do have tools. I think what you said earlier about the importance of community and the community we're trying to build around Count.ai will solve this. We won't solve it. The software won't solve it. The people who want most for answers to come for their kids will actually get a chance to find them and then to share them with others. I think I call it pure motivation. So we're not payers. We're not trying to sell anybody anything. We're just saying that if you really want to help your kids and know that you won't have grandchildren with these issues, we all have to get together and get activated, and we can do it by capturing the data that only we can generate. You can't get that by going to a doctor in long interval. We're talking about continuous information. Now, fortunately, the people who are building the watches and devices, the Aura rings, the Garmins, the Apple watches, are pouring tons of money into being better at capturing these kinds of data points that we give off as human beings. So we don't have to pay to build them. Everybody's already got a phone. All we have to do is create the context and activate a community of people who are willing to work with us to find the answers together. Sounds simple, but 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 it's been a long time in coming, and, the groups, the people that we've talked with at NIH, the people that have met here to try to work out what can we measure, how can we make it easy, affordable, scalable, how can we make it so it's free to families, all those things are really important to me so that every single kid can be helped. Um, Never ever before have we had this kind of a voice in Washington. So we've also got private people, major banks and philanthropic organizations that are approaching us to try to help us to push this new kind of healthcare. And the platform that we presented, we're calling it People First Healthcare. And it's Healthcare 2.0, H2.0 for short. And the first use case will be autism, but it's really all about changing health completely for everybody.
And I think that's such a key part, what you said about them wanting to know what actually improves outcomes. I was reading, to educate myself. I started with the neuroscience of autism.
Right,
And the more I read, the more I realized that, okay, you find the possible genetic component. That doesn't change what you're doing for the person or how the person is doing. You notice, oh, this brain area is wired differently than, this select amount of neurotypical brains we studied.
right,
That doesn't tell me anything about what to do for that particular kid.
right.
And so it is a complete shift
It's a
in.
complete shift. Yeah. And so complete shifts are hard. They usually happen suddenly. When I give speeches about these kinds of changes, I always reflect back, and maybe one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing is because of my experiences in the past. I got a chance to meet the Macintosh team before the Mac was introduced. So, and that was definitely a huge shift. I met with both Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, John Scully, and Steve Jobs spent a long time telling me someday we're all gonna have computers. And, this sounds so who would believe that you wouldn't believe that? And the computers will create things like agents. He actually used that term in my interview. And I remember going back to my office mate then, who was a graphic designer, and saying, "This is so exciting. Someday you're going to be doing everything on a computer. You don't have to use an exaction knife and run type and a drafting table. It's all." And she put her hands on her hips and she said, "That will never happen. I'm gonna give you 50 reasons why that's totally impossible." And then I followed up with a meeting with a friend of mine who was a film editor, and he was cutting a movie in Berkeley and said the same thing to him. "Someday, Robert, you're gonna be able to cut everything on a computer. You won't need these bins of celluloid and people with gloves." And he put his hands on his hips and he said, "That will never happen." So what I learned from that experience is most people won't believe you when you say how much this is gonna change everything. And my second experience was I got a chance to be part of a roundtable in Palo Alto where, Paul Allen, Microsoft co-founder, was bringing people together from all over the world, Samsung, Sony, General Electric, all of the big thinkers in the valley, and we were trying to figure out what we'd do with the World Wide Web. So, we spent days thinking, would people buy things on this web? Do we have to create animated malls and people would little cartoon avatars would walk in? So we're all just racking our brains. And then this young guy comes in the second day for lunch. He sits down. He said, I'm just going to sell books. It's Jeff Bezos. But I said, okay, again, start little, start with something super simple, but we see what happened. Now, I always tell people when Steve Jobs held up the phone in 2007 and said, "Look, this is a phone now." Everyone's like, "Ooh, ah." Did anyone say, "Well, we're gonna be making movies on that"? We have no idea where healthcare is gonna go. But first, we have to own our health as individuals. Now, the good news is we're all connected through this phone. The internet's already working. We don't have to try to develop any of this hardware, and a lot of the software has been developed. What we have to do is decide that the health of our children is so important that we're gonna take responsibility for understanding where they went off the rails, and we're gonna give you the tools to do that, and then if you're gonna be part of the Count.ai community, understand that together, we're finally gonna help each other to get to our answers, both individually and population based. Never ever has there been a time in history where that was possible. So this is pretty big.
And you said this beautifully, the health of our children. This isn't about autism. There are so many things that children are
But
affected with that
yeah,
are, from pediatrics is my background. It is changing a lot. There's chronic conditions that we see younger and younger, high blood pressure in teens. It's
early
uh,
puberty. I mean, some of these are just hard to believe that these things are happening, but even more hard to believe than that, and I feel for the pediatricians, and I feel for the researchers because they've been trying to figure this out one patient at a time. They've been trying to run practices where you have to see all the all
mhm.
the patients in being a healer now. I'm really of a belief that the kind of longitudinal information that we can share with our healing clinicians and the kind of deeply profiled longitudinal data we can share with our researchers, if we realign our research imperatives to be built around 5 or 10 central questions that we ask every year, and we start to share data instead of silo it, it becomes about, again, doing research that improves outcomes rather than getting published in Nature. I mean, all these things are subtle little shifts that I think will be part of the whole milieu that will change, again, that we could never predict when people started getting their own computers or when we all got phones. We can't really see what's going to be happening. One thing we can say about what's happening now as opposed to then is AI and the changes that we're all worried about, and some of them I'm sure will be worrisome, but the speed with which this will happen will be unprecedented. And technology, unlike science and medicine and education, is unstoppable. So the cat's out of the bag, if you will, right? But again, that just pushes back on the population of humans who need to stand up and decide that the decisions we make every single day have more to do with our health and our children's health than the genes we were born with, right?
You recommended a book for me to read called Outsmarting Autism.
Yeah,
And as I was reading it, I thought back to our conversation about, agentic AI and how to capture data because this book covers so many of the different approaches from every single angle.
right.
And you mentioned how ABA could be detrimental. And even the book says figure out the social component later. There's something happening underneath. Maybe it's motor, they can't communicate. Maybe it's gut. And the reason why I bring this up is because just reading this book as not a mother of an autistic child,
Right.
I'm overwhelmed because I have the medical background seeing, like, wait, this thing that they just said affects all of us. And wait, Parkinson's actually might
Yeah.
develop as a result of prolonged exposure to this.
Yeah.
And how does, in your opinion, how can the information in this book be applied to some of these systems that you're building to help parents?
Well, this is where you get to agentic AI theory and the theory of foundation models and large language models. And so this gets, you sort of have to think about the way we're going to start getting information related to our children. So as I mentioned, and if you watch my film Finding the Words, which is I think pretty much still available through Nicole Shanahan's website, you'll see that the way that the parents who got their kids better, and when I say better, one of them is actually working at a startup in machine learning now, and you would never know that he'd ever had an issue. And he was rated one of the lowest kids that the team at UCSF had ever seen, one of the most severe kids. So, how did she do that? Well, it was very complicated and required a massive amount of continued study on her part for 7 years. So, because she had to dig on the internet and go to the library. So, the idea with an agent is when your child first begins showing symptoms, if you have a more deeply profiled view of the health of that child, and you begin to see aberrations in normal development, that you're going to be able to talk to that agent who will have all that information. That'll be part of your Count.ai app, if you will, your data set on your child will immediately begin to steer you to all the information, the literature that's out there, connect you with a clinician who maybe has a particular expertise with exactly those kinds of issues, be able to talk to the community of parents whose kids may have been like yours, who are better. This is how the community, and the community includes the clinicians and the researchers that are all part of this as well, right? This is how we together will begin to start to better understand the subtypes, the right treatment for those subtypes, but continually evolve the scrutiny of those interventions for those kinds of kids. Because I always picture health like this mobile of all these different pieces. When you move this, this moves. We need to be aware of that for our kids. And even the neurodiverse population, the people that I've spoken with over the years who don't want to be cured, so many of them have said, well, I'm on a med for GI issues, or well, I'm on a med for depression. And I said, well, what if you didn't have to be on that med? What if we could actually make you get healthier? Sure, I'd love to do that. So this issue of to help, to cure, to is really a meaningless issue in a way, because we're talking about reestablishing health in those who have lost it. And then the other thing I've been preaching for a long time is when you have a baby, let it be born with a set of instructions. So work that baby up, create a new standard of care. We have APGARs for newborns. Let's do a multi-omic workup. Let's look at what that microbiome looks like at birth. If we have background on the mom and dad, all the better. So we can try to start to create a lifespan view for health for that child. So you as a clinician, if you want to better understand what's happening to a kid who suddenly started having seizures, for example, you could just scroll across and see, well, you just moved. Have you had the house checked for mold? Is your kid getting ready to start her period? All that stuff will be right there, and you will be alerted about that instead of that 10-minute visit trying to catch up, trying to, all of those things are about to massively shift. The back office stuff will all be handled by AI, the billings, all of those kinds of things. Part of our group has even proposed a completely new way of doing insurance that rewards people for staying healthy, where you start with a fund and the healthier you stay, the more money you make, the more, if you share your data, you get rewarded. So I think all of the systems are kind of broken, and that's probably being nice. But they don't have to be anymore, but it has to start with what's best for your kid or for you. And that journey will be a completely personalized view of your kid's health. So treatments like ABA, it's not ABA's fault so much as it was the only game in town. And for parents who's are completely overwhelmed, to have that ABA provider come in and work with your kid for a few hours is probably saving the sanity of so many early parents. So I think the idea isn't necessarily all bad as long as we measure outcomes, but it shouldn't be for 18 years. Or if it is for 18 years, you need to start adding in the deeply profiled biological information that can be driving the behaviors and converging care teams around all of these kinds of things. So you're constantly seeing, is this kid improving? Is this kid improving? And if they're not, you need to change.
The book, one of the other things that I realized is a new parent or a parent of a newly diagnosed child might open this book and there's just all of this information. How would you encourage a parent to approach the information in this book? What's the perspective that helps them instead of be overwhelmed by all of this stuff like, "Oh no, everything is harmful,"
Too much.
to
Yeah, so that's another reason that, and I hate to keep coming back to what we're building, but I really want every parent to know, to have a more deeply profiled view of their child's health. If that child gets diagnosed, I would immediately want them to go on to Count or something like it and make the testing, whether it's blood spot testing or just sticking a little exposometer in the nursery to find out what kind of particulates they may. Let's do that first thing. And let's find out what kind of things we're dealing with that are tweakable. And the earlier those things get tweaked, absolutely the better, right? Because the biology is driving the behavior. Um, it's not the other way around, trust me. If you can do so much ABA and it's still not going to change whatever the obstacles are to speaking, if that kid has serious obstacles to being able to produce speech. It's a motor. It's the most complicated motor thing that we do as human beings. So just again, flipping it back and immediately starting that lifespan view of your child. I'd love it to be literally at birth. You work these kids up at birth and then you get to watch, or the agent gets to watch. And the things that you are collecting, when you collect on an infant, it's so simple. I mean, everybody has these baby monitors which are actually emitting a lot of EMF, which is not good, but someone's gonna come up with a way to collect information on that infant. And we do that. Pediatric is the most quantified medical because you come in pretty regularly and you check the head size and we just wanna expand that exponentially in a way, so you have that, we're calling it a resilience score for that baby. So when something starts to go downhill, if the kid had a virus, if the kid had antibiotics, if the kid had a bunch of vaccines, and suddenly, boom, okay, now we can look and try to see, all right, what's happening? Has there been a big immune response? Can we do this? But then, instead of trying to retrospectively, which is what we've had to do with older and young adults with these issues, try to remember, did this happen then? Did this happen? What happened? Why did I see there a regression? Hopefully no one will ever have to do that kind of thing again because you're actively looking at the things that matter most about keeping your child healthy. So, but again, parents can't expect that you, the clinician, will keep my child healthy. or us healthy. I mean, we really have to own our health and that the decisions we make, doctors can help guide us. And as I said, I see this kind of technology making doctors healers again and giving them, because a lot of the doctors who've been here, and many have been here to the meetings, I mean, they lament the patients where nothing they did ever helped. So those are the ones that keep them awake. And then trying to share the journeys of the patients who did get better would be really nice too, but HIPAA and all the. So, we, the community, have to just decide that we're gonna become active participants in our health, no longer the passive cohorts that are called upon when you wanna do a study on a new drug or whatever. That's what's gonna change everything.
And we already see it with women. Women historically are not represented in clinical
Oh,
trials
yeah.
at all.
Yeah,
And so neither are autistic children.
I know, especially ones that are trickier. The Aspergery, and again, all these are just terms that are meaningless to me, because there are no biomarkers. There's no way to neutrally say, well, this is a kid with, unless your kid has seizures, things that you can clearly identify, or GI issues, which can be super severe in some of our kids. There's so much we don't know. But to me, it's not so much depressing as it is a huge opportunity for the tools that we now have that we just simply didn't have before.
This is another area in which this concept of autistic individuals being canaries in the coal mine
Mhm.
and this element of necessitating personalized care, personalized monitoring, having this in the autistic populations give answers. And it doesn't even have to be, that sudden, they had a sudden shift regression. It could also be a child that during puberty,
Yeah,
something gets worse
that's
or
right.
something changes, and you actually have that information. And this can then apply to the entire population.
Absolutely. There's already a cluster, of young men, late teens, early 20s boys, and I know many of their families where they were all diagnosed with autism. Many of them were not, unable to speak, and had other issues, but seemed to be doing a little bit better. And many of them were spellers, who use the letterboard like my daughter. And then when they reach a certain age, they all start having really major seizures. Okay, well, that's a clue to me. That's a clue about what's going on underneath this, that if we bring everyone together and we start doing deep profiling on these kids, we know that's probably coming. So I've watched some of my friends with young boys, and I said, keep an eye out, because, and sure enough, all of them start. It just seems insane to me that we have never looked at autism that way. It's always about, well, that's just autism. Of course they have GI issues. Well, that's just autism. Of course they can't speak. Well, of course they have seizures. There shouldn't be any of course in any of this. I mean, that's not scientific, for goodness sake, right? So, and as the numbers have exploded, now you have people all the time who are saying, well, there's no epidemic. It's like, okay, talk to any teacher about whether or not there were kids in their classroom 20 years ago who could not speak, who had seizures and GI disease. I mean, it's just so crazy. And as you said, the information that we learned from our study of our kids who have what many clinicians have called the Everest of complex chronic diseases, it's going to inform all of the other sister conditions. Many of them we have, so seizures, so the epileptologists have been here. People are designing all kinds of interesting patches to capture low-level EEG at home rather than having to stick a kid in the and. So all of these mega trends, the direct to consumer space, agentic AI, the fact that there are so many more sick kids, the fact that there are so many more parents who are now actively involved in trying to figure this out, it's all kind of converging now on this moment in time where we have an administration that's looking for answers and no longer saying we just have to accept and love these kids the way they are. It's not enough. I mean, we can do that, but we still have to try to get them healthy, right?
And that's the best phrasing, that you can love them as they are and
Absolutely.
help them get healthy.
Absolutely. And try to prevent other families because this always comes up with other parents. The stories of what these people have to live through are horrible. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Many of my friends have literally had horrible lives with their children. That's not okay. And we certainly don't want anyone else to ever have to repeat the things that we've been through. Never, ever. So again, pure motives. We're not about trying to sell everybody something or reclaim and have power over or mandate things for others. It's not about that at all. We love our children. We love them more than anything, and all we want is for them to be able to do a lot of the things that most people are able to do without even thinking about it, like having a conversation, you know? Um, but again, the activation and the strength and courage has to come from the community that's already been so imposed upon, and that's why what we built is, I'm just giving it to people. Because together we can build it into something that will actually help provide answers. It's the only way. We've tried everything else known to man, and I've seen everybody else try everything else known to man. I really truly believe it is the only way. We all have to own it. We all have to be part of the solution.
The parents are such a key player in these kids' I mean, in general, this is the case, but parents of autistic children have to advocate so much more for their kids than any parent of a neurotypical kid.
Oh, yeah.
When I think back to Charlotte's Web, which was the cannabis oil for seizures,
Yep.
it wasn't science that did the double
Par
blind controlled studies. Yeah, it was parents saying, screw you, I'm going to do this. And then Sanjay Gupta is all of a sudden doing a special on it.
I know.
What would you say to parents to empower them, especially those that are having these really hard times with their kids? How do you empower them? What is the thing for them to focus on to give them hope to be these warriors for their kids?
Well, I think, one of our other members is a gentleman named James Maskell who has a book called Community Cures, and he writes about the most effective kind of treatment for people who have chronic illnesses that are tricky like this is having a group, having a community of people that you can rely upon. So when you're sinking, you got this other mom to kind of pull you up. We've done that in a maybe sometimes formalized way with chat rooms and different groups that have started. ASA probably started that way, NAA. There are a number of different groups that have formed around moms talking to each other. The tricky part is always that you don't know how your kid is alike or different than those other kids. All you have are anecdotes. So some of the people that I've known forever, who've been here many times, who have daughters that are approximately my daughter's age, you always sit down and say, "Well, does your daughter do this? Well, does your daughter well, have you tried?" And it's all so vague and rifle shot, and you just never know how our kids are alike or different. So to go back to this idea of knowing the score, knowing your child's health score, knowing the status of your child's immune system, knowing how healthy your child's microbiome is, knowing what your child's sleep looks like, and approximately when their seizures occur. We can predict my daughter's seizures now, sometimes a month in advance, because
Wow.
we've been collecting data, which is a definite life altering thing for people with epilepsy or seizure. To be able to compare that way brings great strength to families because, right, it always seems like you're just driving in the dark and you're being pulled this direction one month and another direction. And then suddenly your kid starts doing something completely outlandish, has a rash. So then you try to find another doctor who knows about seborrheic dermatitis. Then you go try, that's how it's rolled because there's no anchor. There's no sure stake in the ground that says, okay, this is what I'm dealing with the biology of my child. And When I did this to another parent, this is what happened to my kid. So try it and let's see if that also happens to your kid. This is sort of the Charlotte's Web kind of model. So then you can do N of ones or tens or 20s, and you do it outside of the randomized controlled system. But the randomized controlled system should be influenced by the things we in the community are doing, which is the Sanjay Gupta story you just said. So there's a company that's also part of our group called Radical Science. It's trying to codify the N of one process, and they spell it RADICLE. Um, all these are mega trends. Everything's shifting and moving. The dashboard that we have on SOAP, I've shared it with so many people. I've shared our graphs that show how when we started doing a fitness routine with weight resistance and weight training, her meltdowns essentially vanished. She's never been on any med of any kind. But exercise, I mean, of all the wacky things, but a certain kind of exercise and at a certain intensity, you can basically see that her meltdowns went from up here to nothing. And a lot of parents are really interested in that. Well, what are the side effects? She lost 30 pounds, her sleep was better, her work was better. It doesn't cost me anything, except you get more fit because you're doing the exercise with your kid. So a network of gyms, we're talking to a network of gyms throughout the country about featuring this program and letting people bring, well, this is for older kids, it's not for the young kids and young adults. But if you can actually eliminate some of these horrific life-limiting behaviors by having them work out, oh my goodness. And you don't have to wait 10 years for it to be FDA approved, right? So out of the box thinking is kind of the rule here with this stuff that we're doing. But the vision that has been in my head forever, this data-driven, dashboard-driven, now mobile app-driven way to do health and capture your journey so it's shareable, has gotten a lot of interest from a lot of really important people now. So, and again, it's that agentic AI. It's the fact that this particular administration has an AI czar. They want to be best at AI, and he happens to live not that far from here. So I think we as families have to kind of look outside of the circle that we thought would be the circle that helped to rescue us outside of the classic clinical mainstream medicine, insurer, constant war and battle over what they're going to cover, to some of the tech companies, to some of the people who are designing software that's transformative in terms of redefining the way we think about health. Those are our allies now. And they're powerful and very well funded humans who are now having kids, some of them having kids with issues. So there's a real interest in answering these questions. And I've been actually stunned at the response my message has gotten in people that I thought would not be interested in all, and changing it up at this point in time. It's resonating with people, so maybe that's a good sign.
It's a sign that the time has come for the idea to be born.
I absolutely agree, and it will take all of us. It's the old "it takes a village." Well, in this case, it takes a whole world, 'cause everyone in the world, I've got people coming here from all over the world who all wanna help solve this. I mean, wow, that's that's something. It gives me hope for my daughter for sure, and as I always tell people, other parents. And, so many of these parents have just done remarkable work creating communities, creating new educational, starting philanthropic organizations to do research. We're it for them. If we give up on them and think that they're okay, they're kind of fixed now, the game is over for them. So you've gotta get yourself up and become part of the army that's determined to find answers. I'm not gonna stop until my daughter can speak, and all the 30 million other people out there who can't. Why can't they speak? We should be able to figure out why they can't speak and help them to speak, right? Likewise, why can't we figure out about the seizure thing and how the seizure thing is? So it's awakened the scientific curiosity in the not so scientific. We become much more scientific though, because we have to. and it's from love.
That's a beautiful statement, that you've become more scientific and it's because of love.
Yeah.
So that's actually a great place to kind of close out our talk, at least the first talk
Okay.
on this podcast.
Right.
And where can people find you, learn more about what you're doing? I will list a lot of the things that you've mentioned in the show notes,
Right.
including your film.
Right.
Where can people find you to learn more, connect with you or the projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I would love, so I'm gonna send you, more information about how to sign up or get on a waiting list to be part of the Count AI beta, so I'll send that information to you. If you have questions for me specifically, you can reach me at elizabeth@2mfoundation.org. Be patient. Sometimes it takes me a little while to get back. I always talk to families. No, I will always talk to families. And, watch the news because there's gonna be some big news coming out soon from the administration about redefining autism. So, yeah, and say and pray. And send good vibes to Northern California. Thank you, Julie. It was delightful to chat with you. I'm so happy you're part of the Army now.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I'm excited to see how all the worlds combine to
Yeah,
move this forward, because on another level, I think something else much bigger is happening here. So
yeah, I agree. Thank you so much.
thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.